often people ask me, would I ever go back to the United States of America after having been held in Guantanamo Bay and so forth? And I reply to them that I've never been to the United States of America. America came to me. And it showed me a face of itself that I never knew existed. It came to me in my house in Pakistan, where I had evacuated to in 2002, after having worked on a project to build a school for girls in Taliban-administered Afghanistan. And the United States, after having me received from the Pakistani government, took me through a whole series of prisons and detention sites, which included Kandahar and Bagram and ultimately Guantanamo Bay. And people often ask this question, being a Muslim, did the Americans ever let you pray? And I respond by saying that my first prayer in US custody was with my hands tied behind my back, my legs shackled and forced upon the floor with a strap across my lap, with the sounds of dogs barking, the roar of the engines of the airplane that I was on, with the screams of other detainees, and with the flashes of cameras, despite the hood that I was wearing, that I could make out being taken as trophy pictures. And then on my left-hand side, on my immediate left, though I couldn't see, I heard the voice of a man who said in the Arabic, أخي دخل وقت الصلاة لازم تصلي, who was in the exact same manner as I was. And it was like this that I took part in my first prayer in US military custody. So when people ask me, did the Americans ever let you pray? My answer to them is, brother, you should know that there is no circumstance in which they, whoever they happen to be, can ever stop you. We know as Muslims we can pray in any eventuality if we're not unable to because of circumstances of being sick or being otherwise incapacitated. And indeed, the prayer, as we know, was defined and prescribed on the believers at the specified times. But in places like Bagram and Guantanamo and Kandahar, you don't know what the time is. You don't know what time of day it is if you're in a windowless cell. You don't know what time of year it is if you don't know or don't have access to a calendar. If you're in solitary confinement, you don't even know if there are people close by to you. So you have to resort to those things that only you can understand. Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, لَيْسَ الْبِرَّ أَن تُوَلُّوا وُجُوهَكُمْ قِبْلَ الْمَشْرِقِ وَالْمَغْرِبِ, that it is not piety simply that you face towards the east or the west. Indeed, piety is of many things. To believe in Allah and His book and His messengers and so forth, and to do the right actions, which includes the freeing of prisoners. And when you're in a situation like where you don't know where the Qibla is, where you don't know which way is east or west, then you start to realize what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about. In a situation where you don't even have water to make wudu. When I was held in the Bagram detention facility, I never understood the real meaning or the necessity or the great privileges we have in Islam of things like tayammum. Not until they give you one bottle of 50 milliliter water to drink every day. You either drink it or you have nothing else to drink or wash with it. And when you're faced with the stark choice of having no water but to drink, then you have to make a decision. Shall I use this to make wudu or to wash, or shall I drink it because there's nothing else? And of course, any sane person makes the decision that this is water to drink. So then you're left with making tayammum. So فَتَيَمَّمُوا سَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا, which Allah says in the Quran, is what you do if you don't find water. That you make the dry ablution. And if you make dry ablution for a whole year, then it's unsurprising if when you are eventually given enough water to make wudu, that you forget what is the right tartib, what is the right way in which to make wudu. Should I do istinshaq first? Should I do the madmad first? Do I do my hands first? Because you forget. It's been such a long time. And of course in tayammum you only do the hands and the face. If Ramadan comes along, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْ. He said, and from amongst who of you witnessed this month, witnessed the changing of the new month, from the changing of the moon, let him fast. But what happens if you have no timetable? If you have no ability to make phone calls to Saudi Arabia or to anywhere else, or you have no ability to ever see whether the moon has come new for this month or not. You have no idea whether it's Fajr or whether it's Maghrib, and you have to estimate. What do you do then? What do you do in a situation where you don't have access to those basic norms that even some of the worst convicted prisoners in the world have access to? It is then that you start to begin having tawakkul ala Allah and start having real reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and start doing those things not ritualistically, but knowing that the very preservation of your soul is based upon your ability to deal with the situation or not. There is a verse that is in Surah Al-Talaq that many of the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay and elsewhere adhere to and find in their hope. It's strange because this verse is to do with the issue of talaq and divorce. But in this you find hope. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. He said, whoever fears Allah, He will make for him a makhraj, a way out, an exit. وَيَرْزُقُهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ, and will provide for him in a way that he could never have imagined. So that many of us who've returned from Guantanamo Bay and the other secret detention sites have now a voice in a way that we never could have imagined before. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided this as a vehicle so that we can speak about the atrocities that continue to take place, and that there is a sum'ah, that people are listening, and not just ordinary people, not just you sitting there in the United States of America, not just people in the Arab world, not just people in the Muslim world, but in the wider world. People are beginning to listen and recognizing that these atrocities that have been meted out regularly upon Muslim prisoners has now become a sign of the times, but that it hasn't broken us. Indeed, according to the old adage, if it doesn't break you, it makes you. It makes us strong through that furnace that we were thrown into. The brothers came out as shining steel, and I speak not of myself, but the brothers were much more powerful and more steadfast than me. One of those brothers you may have heard of is the first one who's been released since the inauguration of Barack Obama. His name is Binyam Muhammad al-Habashi, who's originally from Ethiopia but was a resident in Britain. He was abducted and sold over by Pakistani officials for the bounties of thousands of dollars that were handed over by the Americans for all of the foreigners at the time. And he spent a total of around 7.5 years in US military detention and secret detention sites, where he was subjected to some of the worst atrocities that I have heard, despite my own experiences. But even having spoken to him, and I really urge all of you brothers and sisters, inshallah, to visit the site of CAGEprisoners.com and see the interview that I conducted with him, not for the sake of the media, but for the sake of the Muslim world, to see how it was that he found faith and strength in his faith. One of the most powerful times for me, the most resonant times for me in Guantanamo Bay, despite having spent 2 years in solitary confinement, was near the last month before I was released. And I was put in a cell block with prisoners from other parts of the world. And there are prisoners from 40 different countries who speak a wide variety of languages that range all the way from Swahili, every Arabic dialect you can think of, Turkish, Pashto, Farsi, and so forth, and English. That in these cages, during the month of Ramadan, when each person is in his individual cell, which measures 8 foot by 6 foot, in which you're unable to take more than 3 steps in either direction, but you can at least see through to the other cells in the main blocks. that the person who's in the front of the block, and this block contains 48 prisoners, 24 on either side, adjacent to one another, would lead the prayer, especially during the Taraweeh in Ramadan. And then he would raise his hands and make dua. You couldn't see him, but you knew what he was doing, and you could hear him. And he would say, amongst other things, Allahumma fuqqa qaydana wa qayda asra al-muslimin warudduna ila ahlina salimin. O Allah, free us and free the other prisoners, and return them and return us safely to our families. And the many du'as that he would make. And you would hear the sounds of people sobbing and crying and weeping from the fear of Allah, knowing that their families have now gone through a greater part of the decade when they last saw them. And you used to hear this sound. It was a bizarre sound. It was the sound of razor wire, which is in coils, rubbing against barbed wire, because that's how they put it on the tops of the fences where we were detained. And it sounded like wind chimes, pushed and impelled by a soft Caribbean breeze. And that, coupled with the sound of the Imam making the dua, brought tears to my eyes. And the khushu', the tranquility that I felt in the prayers during that time, I have never felt before or after. And I can tell you that I've been to places around the world where one would have or should have felt this sort of tranquility. Remember, Guantanamo Bay is a place where these prisoners from around the world, these enemy combatants, these so-called alleged terrorists, first brought the adhan, the call of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to Guantanamo Bay. The Guantanamo Bay, a place where the iguana is a protected species. It is protected under the Endangered Species Act. But the men in orange, the men who wear the orange suits and have the blackened out goggles and have the ear muffs and have the hoods placed over their heads and a face mask so they don't bite, are made to look like the extraterrestrial animals that we've been told they are, the subhumans, who've been dehumanized primarily because they are Muslims. We've been told that this so-called outdated war on terror is a war against terror. But why have we never seen Tamil tigers from Sri Lanka who carry out suicide bombings in Guantanamo Bay? Why have we never seen people from the Continuity IRA, the Irish Republican Army in the UK, ever held in Guantanamo Bay, or from the Shiny Path Guerrillas or any other non-Muslim organizations? We've only seen Muslims there. But I say to brothers and sisters, Bushra, good news for you. Good news. Because Guantanamo Bay has become a madrasa. It has become a madrasa of life, a school of life, where people have learnt, and learnt in ways you could never have imagined. One of the things that used to take place earlier on in Bagram and Kandahar, and then later in Guantanamo, was the abuse of the Quran, the desecration of the Quran, of Allah's word. We used to see it being kicked around and thrown around, and sometimes if we were given the Quran, the soldiers would say, come and get your holiest of holiest books, learn how to kill Americans, as if that was why the Quran was revealed. And even worse than that, in Kandahar we saw it ripped into pieces and thrown into the buckets that we were given with defecation and urination. And although to us as Muslims this may be the unadulterated word of God, to the soldier who has no belief, or the few who have, or the many who have no belief, it is simply ink and paper. And if he can dehumanize the human being the way he has done, then what is ink and paper? And so this, and as a result of this, as a result of the soldiers sometimes coming in and searching the cells and abusing the Quran, as a result, the prisoners took the stance to say, we no longer want a Quran in our cells, so that you cannot use it as an excuse to desecrate it. But that didn't stop the prisoners learning the Quran. In fact, they continued and they expanded their knowledge of the Quran, and they did it the old way. The Quran was revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam al-Nabi al-Ummi. He is the unlettered prophet. He could not read and he could not write. And in the same way, the companions who had the Quran given to them would rush off to battle, at the Battle of Yamama in particular. And were all getting killed, the Huffaz, the people who had memorized the Quran. The Sahaba conferred with one another, let us put this beautiful book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a written form, lest we lose it. That is why the Quran was put together in the first place, in a book form. And so the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay began to recite and memorize and teach this old way, by word of mouth. And that is how 90%, according to the latest figure, based upon one of the brothers who recently returned, that is the figure of how many people have become Huffaz, memorizers, entire memorizers of the entire Quran. And that is just one of the sciences that people disseminated between those cages. And there were many others. People taught one another languages that they never knew existed. People taught one another a hadith that they had memorized from before, and mutun, and entire texts of different books of fiqh and seerah and so forth. And they taught them many other things, all the way from Hubble's expanding universe theory to human rights issues today that are being challenged by people's lawyers. And so the prisoner in Guantanamo Bay, who was not politicized, who was not an enemy to begin with of the United States of America, began and became somebody who was not only politicized, but highly and acutely aware of his surroundings and what is taking place in the rest of the world. So finally, and there's so much I could tell you, and I know that time is limited, it's important, and it comes back down to us. What is our duty as Muslims? What is our duty as ordinary people? What are we supposed to do? What's the ruling? What's the moral position? That if you see somebody abused and tortured in front of you, what would you do? And if you don't see them right in front of you, but you know it's happening next door, or the door after that, what are you supposed to do? Surely, there's an onus. If this was your own individual relative, your mother, your father, may Allah protect them all, your brother, your sister, your cousin, your wife, what would you do? Close your eyes for a minute and imagine being in the middle of the night, raided by unidentified individuals who take at gunpoint your most beloved relative, and then do to them the things that you can only possibly imagine. What would you do? Would you cry? Would you hide? Would you drown in your own sorrow? Or would you stand like a man and do what is necessary for you to bring relief and deliverance to those people who are detained in this manner? So then the question is, where are the avenues? I know and I understand that in the United States of America things have been difficult, but they've been difficult everywhere. People have been detained everywhere. People have been arrested everywhere. People have been tortured everywhere. It's not an excuse. The Sahaba are a great example for us, but even a greater example from that are the prophets. And there's one story that resonates amongst all of the prisoners from all faiths and all backgrounds. That is the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. It is the only story in the Quran that from its end to its beginning is told in its entirety, with no deviation in the story. And we know that Yusuf alayhi salam was imprisoned for a crime that he didn't commit, was at that time a prisoner held without charge or trial, falsely accused, falsely imprisoned. But had it not been for the imprisonment process, he could not have been empowered in the way that he was because of the ability to interpret the dreams. And had it not been for this story of wrongful imprisonment, the Quran, the Torah, and the Injil will all be incomplete. And that is something that's extremely important to us as individuals. But what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to campaign in whatever way that we can. We're supposed to spread knowledge and awareness and not be afraid, and let people know, Muslims and non-Muslims, in whatever ability and capacity we're able to do so, with hikmah, with wisdom, with steadfastness, but with firmness. And let people understand that our rights have been trodden upon, not because we are terrorists or because we are diametrically opposed to the way of life of the West, but simply because we see clearly that Muslim life, blood, honor and property has become cheap, and we're supposed to value it and let people know that it is a valuable commodity that cannot be dispensed with easily without men and women standing up to defend those concepts. So I urge all of you brothers and sisters, inshallah, to take a little bit of heed from whatever I've said that's good, inshallah, and from that make a resolve to try to defend the rights of prisoners and abused people wherever you can. Begin with your own communities. I know that there are people in your own communities who have been demonized, who have been arrested without charge or trial, or have been under bad anti-terror legislation being held. Please campaign on their behalf and remember them. And remember also, even in the United Kingdom and the United States of America, the people who have spearheaded these campaigns have been non-Muslims, and we welcome their support. But it's about time that the Muslims also understand that they have to become their own best advocates. Barakallahu feekum wa jazakumullahu khairan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all that is good from me and reject all that is bad. Please, if I have said something wrong, it's from the shaitan, and anything that I've said good is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب إنه هو الغفور الرحيم واستغفروه. جزاكم الله خير.